All right, we're on part 2 of the Constitutional Convention. So, after the Great Compromise is created, after they finally have got a legislative plan, now you have to start looking at what that term population means. Because remember, Virginia is trying to include their enslaved population. And the North is not blind to this. They do realize that this is what the South is trying to do. So now you got to figure out what does population mean so that you can accurately give representation in the House based on that population. So this is where the 3/5 compromise comes in. So Southern states are very happy with the fact that they are now going to get the House of Representation, and it's going to be based on population, and they want to count all of their enslaved people into their population. So when you look at people in Virginia and you look at like South Carolina plantations, they have 100 or more slaves that they have owned and bought and abused and used. So when you look at the plantation system, you're looking at 1-2 individuals owning over 100 people or more. And so they want to count them in their population. They do not want to count the enslaved population as human beings with civil rights, our freedom, liberties, none of that. Okay, all they want to do is use them to increase their representative totals in the House. So it's just how they look at things. Okay, so what they're hoping to do is have every single one of their enslaved people count in their population total. Some of the smaller and non-slave owning states, and really all the states pretty much have slaves in them. Okay, so even in the North they have slaves. They just do not have what you would have seen in the South. But when you look at these other areas, they are a little perturbed. They're a little bit upset about how the South is reading the term population. And so again, it looks like things are just going to break down at the Constitutional Convention. So arguments are breaking out, and finally a compromise does get reached. And this word, a compromise, is a give and take process. You are going to get some of the stuff you want, but you're not going to get everything that you want. And that's going to be true for the other side as well. So a compromise is like a negotiation. It's a deal that you agree to reach. Okay? So in the 3/5 compromise, Southern states are going to be able to count 3 out of every 5 slaves for their population and representation purposes. So it's not that you count someone as 3/5. It's just like when you count up 5, 1, 2, 3 counts, 4, 5 doesn't. Okay. So the South got what they wanted. They got representation. They got more of a population count, so their representatives in the House would increase. So they would have more people present in the House. And the North goes along with this because the North says, well, you got to pay taxes on it. So if you want your enslaved population to count in your population, you're going to have to pay taxes on your enslaved people. Because in the Constitution, enslaved people are counted as property. And you always pay property tax. You pay property tax on your car, your house. You pay property taxes on all your possessions. Okay? So because they are getting tax money from the 3/5 on the slave population, the North lets it go. Could have ended slavery. Could have just done the whole thing and really just ended the whole issue. But the North wants to pay less taxes, so they are complicit. They go along with allowing slavery to continue. But also, It's not just that they're getting taxes. The northern economy is also based on slavery. When you look at New York City, it is a major slave trading area. Like, that is actually where a lot of the enslaved boats are bringing in people. So, but you also look at insurance companies. If you buy insurance on your house and your car, people purchased insurance on their enslaved people as well. And so northern businesses are running off slavery as well. And then, when you guys were in American history, when the factories really started building up in the north, they're going to use the products of slave labor. You've got the plantation systems really feeding the northern factories. So most people are at the Constitutional Convention, they're just doing this because they're okay with slavery. You got a good group that's perfectly fine with it, and then you've got some who are like, hey, we need to get rid of slavery. But it's not all the founding fathers. It's a very small amount who are saying that we shouldn't even have to be making this compromise and we shouldn't have slavery. So they're just the minority group at the moment. They're just a very small portion of the attendants. Most of the attendants are okay with slavery because that is really what the economy's base is in some way or another. So the South and the North, they get what they want. It never really addresses the issue of slavery. And then eventually the Civil War has to happen so that you can change things like this, so that you can change the Constitution. Because slavery is very protected in the Constitution. Because we're going to look at the next one that protects it. Commerce and slave trade compromise. Commerce is business, and slave trading is a business. The North traded, they insured the enslaved population. It was a huge business for them. So I give you the old map of the triangular slave trade or the Atlantic trade. But when you look at the enslaved population, they're really being brought into the northern areas. That's where you had major harbors, and then they're getting bought and traded throughout the United States. This is a major business. And so, not just for the North, but also, of course, for the South, because they are making products with the stuff. So, one of the big, products, of course, their plantation systems, tobacco, and then later you're going to see cotton and stuff becoming a major for the Southern plantations. When you look at the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise, it states that all international slave trade is going to stop in 1807. So you're not going to be able to you're not going to be able to import any more slaves from the continent of Africa. So you can't bring them in anymore. No more international. That means foreign slaves. So this triangle is going to be broken. That's what we're saying. It ain't coming in this way anymore. The compromise gave a 20-year deadline. Okay. So you cannot continue to bring in the imported enslaved population after 20 years. But does it really stop the slave trade? So you're not doing this anymore. But you have a huge slave population in the United States at this point. And it's not going to stop the slave trade. It's not, because what's going to happen is people in these areas that owned other human beings, they're going to sell them when times get tough. They're going to barter, trade. It's never going to stop the in-house slave trade, because that is what you're going to have. People are naturally going to have children. It's just a fact of life. So the enslaved population, a lot of times they have families, they have children, because that's the happy part of their day is the fact that they can have a family. That was one of the ways that they resisted slave owners and resisted the constant oppression on them. So as time has gone on, the enslaved population just increases because of natural population increase. So you don't have to, if you're a slave owner, you don't have to buy international slaves anymore. Your plantation that used to only have 20 slaves is now up to a population of 50. And as the generations continue, it just continues to increase. So slave owners are okay with this as time goes on because they know that, hey, my great great grandfather had this many slaves on the plantation that you inherited. You know that now look at the enslaved population that you have inherited. And people inherit slaves. And so it's just the way things, like the way they're looking at it is, okay, you can stop the international, but we're still going to buy and trade human beings like they're pieces of property because the Constitution is treating enslaved people like they are property. The next compromise is a complicated one, and it is about the presidency and the Electoral College. And I know you guys have heard a lot about the Electoral College because of elections recently. So, a long time ago, elections are a lot different than they are today. You did not have like all the electronic stuff. When you go vote today, you get your ballot, the piece of paper, or you can vote on the electronic machines. But even if you get the old pen and paper one, you're still putting it through like a Scantron machine. It scans it and all that. Things are a lot easier today with elections because of technology and electronics. Back then, they would electricity. They would never have. Well, Ben Franklin, but they're just not where we are. Okay, so before this whole machine stuff and all this like technology, things are very manually done, and you manually counted ballots. So if you had an election in November, your results, if you really counted them all up and stuff, and you just did it as a big country kind of thing, it might not be revealed for 2 or 3 months. And that's not going to do well for the American people. People want to know on election night who the president is, like who's going to be the new president. So people want to know immediately, they want fast results. So for 2 3 months, it really wouldn't work for the American people. We like immediate answers to stuff. So it was decided that there's got to be an easier way than doing like a total nationwide kind of vote where you would send your votes into the federal government. So what they decided was every state would conduct elections. So states do conduct elections. That's one of their reserved powers. And what we would do is the states would run the elections, the states would count up their state vote, and they would report it to the federal government. And what you would have to ensure like an extra safety in this whole process is a special group of people called electors, and that is where your electoral college comes in. So I'll give you the example of the 2000 election up here, and this might help you understand a little bit better. You and I go vote in the popular vote, the popular election, or the general election. So in November, you and I will have the opportunity to go vote for the presidency and many, many other positions. But the Electoral College only deals with the presidency. So when people voted in the year 2000, you had 50.5 million for George W. Bush and you might as well say 51 million for a former Vice President Al Gore. So when you look at the popular vote, and you just look at the popular vote, who looks like they won? The 50.5 or the 51 million? It looks like to people who would look at popular vote that Al Gore should have been the president. He got like half a million, He got like 500